Retro, the final frontier. These are the voyages of Hey Birt, his 5-year mission to explore online auctions, to seek out old tech from his youth, to bid like no one has bid before. Hi, this is Jeff from the Ozark Mountains in Missouri, USA. Well, this is the story of trying to track down the fast load cart I had in my youth. This is a rather usual fast load cart because it's a rather homemade affair. So without further ado, let's grab a cup of coffee and get started. Thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this episode. They offer an excellent quick-turn PCB prototyping service, which now has a free upgrade to the 150-160 temperature range. They also offer a wide range of services that allow you to go from idea to a finished product, including CNC machining, 3D printing, injection molding, PCB assembly. Go on over to PCBWay.com/OEM to find out more. Somehow my parents managed to scrape together enough money to buy a Commodore 64 system when I was a kid. Now, all this hardware is new except for the disk files and the disk within them. These are the ones from when I was a kid, and my dad somehow managed to keep a hold of these. Having a 1541 disk drive was great. They were both faster and more reliable than a dataset, though they were rather slow compared to other disk drives of the era. In 1984, Epix came out with the fast load cartridge, which made the disk drives a lot faster. By the end of 1984, they released a version 2, but I was not able to find out what the difference between these two was functionally. Of course, there were a lot of other fast load cartridges and ROMs that came out at the same time. The C64 market was huge and everybody wanted a piece of that. The fast load cartridge I had was a JetLoad. Now, these are a rather homemade looking affair. They were available at Hamfest in the Midwest of the United States. And as I recall, they were about half the price of the Epix cart, so being frugal with my own money, this is what I bought. As a bonus, it does have a reset switch. So I set up a saved search on eBay, and after several months, one popped up, and I made a deal with the seller, and I got it, and noticed straight away it said Jet version 2.0. Being able to count at least up to 10, I figured that meant that there had to be a version 1.0, so I kept the search active, and it took years to find one more, and it just happened to be a version 1.0, so I was lucky enough to get it too. The total time period between starting to look for these and get both of these was about 5 years. They are pretty scarce. But now I was happy I had both of them, and I could read these with the EEPROM programmer and see what the difference is. In the intervening years between getting version 2.0 and 1.0, I was trying to do some research into JetLoad, but there was not a lot to find. I did find this website, links to these are below, that did have some information on the fast load, and it contains a RAR file which has binaries of a bunch of different versions, including what they say is a JetLoad version. And they say it seems like a pretty direct copy of the Epix 2.0 cart. And I also found this Google Groups archive, which also talks briefly about the JetLoad. And the conclusion here is that, yes, version 2.0 of JetLoad was basically the same as version 2 of the Epix fast load. This is apparent if you do a cursory look with a hex editor at Fastload version 2 and the Jet version 2. There are some areas of difference, but there are large chunks of it that are exactly the same. So the JetLoad 2.0 is just a copy with some slight obfuscation of the Epix cart. Images of the jet load are also very sparse. I found one blurry image of the PCB online, as well as a nice picture of the packaging. Here's also a better picture that I took. Now, as we can see, the jet load was produced by someone in Lima, Ohio. And yes, it is pronounced Lima. I grew up about 50 miles south of there. Much of northwest Ohio was a swamp back in the day. It was known as the Great Black Swamp. And, malaria was a problem because it was a swamp, and the quinine came from a bark that came from Lima, Peru at the time. So the county seat of Allen County in this area of Ohio was named Lima in honor of Lima, Peru. How the pronunciation changed, I don't know. But there you go, a little Ohio trivia. I have the JetLoad version 2 cartridge installed here. And you can see when I reset it, it basically pops up JetLoad instead of fast load. So not a lot of difference. All the menu commands are exactly the same. If I hit pound, I get the main menu. I can do a directory. That works just like fast load. So no big surprise there. This is essentially the same as the later fast load version 2 cartridge. When I plugged in the version 1 cartridge and got this green express text, I was really confused. And I tried it out, and hitting pound does nothing. So I played around on the keyboard and I found that M brings up the same menu as the Epic's fast load, but in green. You can do a directory. Return the basic. The choices in the menu are the same. The rest of the menus seem to be the same. You hit the exclamation point to go into the machine language monitor. Percent should exit you out of there, but it doesn't. I haven't figured out what exits you out of the monitor yet. Other than that, the green text and pressing M instead of pound and the exit from the monitor, it seems to work exactly like the Epic's cart. Looking at the Express binary and comparing that to the Epic's with a hex editor, they don't look a lot alike. You can see similarities in some places. But I think that Express is really a much better obfuscated copy of the Epic's cart. The website I mentioned before that has the nice RAR file, it also has an Express loader version on there, but the binary from it is completely different than the one I have. I also saw an Express mentioned on this table of different fast loaders comparing the speed, but there's no further information given about it, and I haven't been able to find out what it is. So I've got both JetLoad boards, but not the original version 1.0 EEPROM, but I suspect that's the same as the 1.0 Epic's fast load cart. When I was using the JetLoad cartridge as a kid, I found that it worked fine for most discs, but there were a few it didn't work for. And, I would just remember what they were. I never thought to write it down. When my dad retired, he learned about computers first by using the Commodore 64, and being much wiser than me, he wrote on the disk that you could not use JetLoad, no JetLoad, and also how to load the program on that disk. And I'll also point out here that this is my writing from the mid-1980s. This is my dad's writing from, the 1990s when he was in his later 60s, and his handwriting was still much better than mine. Anyhow, at the time, I didn't understand why some disk would work and some disk wouldn't, and I thought now that I had these cartridges again, I would try to figure that out. So I looked through my list of disk images that I had taken off all my original disk a few years ago, found ones that my dad had written down no jet load, and that also had no errors when I imaged the disk, so I knew that they would work. And I found this word processor here called the Writer, and I used the Zoom floppy and this floppy drive here to make a new disk of that. And we will try that now with JetLoad 2.0 cartridge in there, which is the same as the Epic's Fast Load 2, and we'll see what happens and figure out why it does not work. So I've got the JetLoad version 2 cartridge installed right now. I'm going to pop in the newly created disk and hit Commodore Run Stop, which loads the first thing off the disk. And you notice this is searching for fload loading. Well, it turns out fload is a fast load program that some software vendors used. That is a software disk fast loader. It loads that first and then uses that to more quickly load the rest of the program. In Europe, there was a version of this for tapes, to load tapes faster because tapes were more popular there at the time. So I tried this, and yeah, it worked. I tried it on a few different disks, in fact, and they all worked. And I tried it with the Express ROM, the one with the green text, and that worked. And I tried it with a Epic's Fast Load version 1 EEPROM. I burnt that to an EEPROM, plugged it into one of my JetLoad boards, and that worked as well. So now I am really at a loss as to what the code was that was on the version 1 of the JetLoad. Because there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 or maybe 10 different programs out of all 130 disks that I had as a kid that didn't work with the JetLoad. So, but I can't reproduce the problem now, and I know for sure which disk had that problem because my dad noted them on the disk. So it's still a mystery. My guess is it has something to do with programs that have their own built-in fast loader, and the code in the fast load cartridge is not giving up or letting the software fast loader take control properly. That would be my guess. So what was the result of this 5 years worth of effort to find the JetLoad cartridge and get one of each version? Well, it was partially successful. I got one of each version of the board, which are exactly alike except for it says Jet 1.0 and 2.0. But the EEPROM that was in the 1.0 cart was not the 1.0 EEPROM. It was the Express EEPROM. And it seems like both the Express and the Jet 2.0 are just clones of the Epic's Fast Load cart. And they all work with all my old discs from a kid that say no JetLoad. So I'm really at a loss to know why the JetLoad 1.0 cart didn't work, which I'm guessing now is what I had, because I know these discs didn't work with the JetLoad when I was a kid. They didn't suddenly start working after 40 years. There is a spot on the JetLoad cartridge labeled switch. I never knew what that was for. I saw, I think it was on that Google Groups mailing list on there in that discussion, that there was instructions that came with it on how to add a switch here that would turn the cartridge on and off. So rather than having to unplug it for those programs that wouldn't load with it, you could just disable it. So I'm guessing that's what that link there is for. Having the inbuilt reset switch was great. It was a little hokey the way it was bodged on there, but it sure beat having to shut the machine on and off all the time. That was a nice addition. Being a bare board cartridge is not so great. It's more difficult to plug in than a real cartridge. You've got bare traces on there you can drop something on, or it's easier for static dissipation to cause problems, that type of thing. But when I was a kid, this fit my budget, and it was nice having everything load a lot faster with it. So it would still be nice to find the original JetLoader 1.0 ROM. So if you happen to have a JetLoad cartridge, would sure like to get a copy of that ROM, as well as a scan of the original instructions that came with it. That doesn't seem to be anywhere on the internet at all. And it would be nice just to add this to the collective knowledge of the Commodore community. If you have any questions or comments, well, leave them in that comment section down there below. Links to all the stuff I talked about is in the video description, as well as the link to the video I did on the Zoom floppy, and a video I did when I repaired this computer originally. It turns out, when I got this computer out, there was a little crack up here on top of the keyboard, and I realized this is the computer that I was working on when I came up with the case saver kit. The case had really been bashed. I can just recall I decided not to try to do anything with that crack at the time because it wasn't that bad, but it got worse. So I had to do some work on that, and it's a lot better now. It won't get any worse. You can still see it was repaired from the top, but it's okay now. The disk drive we used, that was also one sitting on the shelf. I did a quick refurb on it. It just needed cleaned and lubed and aligned a little bit, but it worked fine. These are one without mechanisms are very nice. Thanks to everyone who helps support the Hey Birt channel through Patreon and other means. It's greatly appreciated. And until next time, bye.